be acceptable unto you this day, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, Dave and Francine will particularly, Francis will particularly like this story because my first story comes from a Hungarian writer who writes about the possibility of twins having a conversation inside the womb.
That's pretty good.
So one twin inside the womb asks the other, "Do you believe in life after delivery?" And the other replied, "Why, of course, there has to be something after delivery. Maybe we're here to prepare ourselves for what will be later." "Nonsense," said the first twin. "There's no life after delivery. What kind of life would that be?" And the second twin says, "I don't know, but there'll be more light than here. Maybe we'll walk on our legs and eat from our mouths. Maybe we'll even have other senses that we can't understand now." And the first twin replied, "That's absurd. Walking is impossible. Eating with our mouths, ridiculous. The umbilical cord supplies nutrition and everything we need. Life after delivery is to be logically excluded." And the second insisted, "Well, I think there is something, and maybe it's different than it is here. Maybe we won't need this physical cord anymore." And the first replied, "Nonsense. And moreover, if there is life, then why has no one ever come back here? Delivery is the end of life, and after delivery there is nothing but darkness and silence and oblivion. It takes us nowhere." "Well, I don't know," said the second, "but certainly we'll meet Mother and she'll take care of us." And the first replied, "Mother? You actually believe in Mother? That's laughable. If Mother exists, then where is she now?" And the second said, "She's all around. We're surrounded by her. We are of her. It is in her that we live, and without her, this world would not and could not exist." And said the first, "Well, I don't see her, and so it's only logical that she doesn't exist." To which the second replied, "Sometimes when you're in silence and you focus and you really listen, you can perceive her presence and you can hear her loving voice calling down from above." Kind of cute, eh? Interesting perspective on our faith. Is there a God? Does life exist beyond this world? And who can we trust to tell us? Well, hopefully today's reading will shed a little bit of light on those kinds of questions. You know the story. It's the story of the Transfiguration. We talk about it every year at this time, just before we get into Lent. So Lent is beginning Shrove Tuesday on Shrove Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, and Lent follows on Wednesday. And so we have the story of the Transfiguration, and it's the story of Jesus taking his three most trusted, his three inner disciples, Peter, James, and John, up to the side of a mountain. Now it's interesting, this particular mountain, there's only a couple of possibilities of which mountain. They don't know exactly which mountain this was, but it's not any of the mountains that would take several days to climb to the top of. Obviously, this is a mountain that is nearby and is not even a day's climb, because they were there and they were back someplace else, we read the next day. But in the story, you know the story, Jesus, his face turns a shining color. In fact, his whole body turns a shining color. His clothes become radiant and they come like light. And then appears with them the two heroes of the Old Testament, Moses and Elijah. And then Peter says, "Lord, let me build 3 tents. And one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." And then the voice from heaven saying that God loves his Son and that his Son is to be listened to. And the disciples, of course, are terrified as you and I would be terrified hearing something like that happen. But they are transformed, as you and I would be transformed, I'm sure, from this kind of a mountaintop experience. I'm wondering if any of you have ever had an experience that you might call a mountaintop experience. I know that some of you have. Do you know, it's interesting, after being here in this church almost 15 years, it's hard to come up with examples that I haven't already used before. But I realize that the one that I'm about to tell you, I haven't ever told you before. Either that or I'm forgetting, because sometimes that happens. I forget what I'm going to say, or I've forgotten that I've said it, and on top of that I've forgotten what I was saying. So, anyway, this story goes back to when we were missionaries in Papua New Guinea, so it's the 1980s, and we've been there for, I guess, a few years, and I developed a little bit of a young men's group, and we decided to climb the second highest mountain in Papua New Guinea. It's called Mount Gilaway. We've got some pictures of some mountain climbs we did, but Mount Gilaway is not one of these. It's the second largest mountain in Papua New Guinea. It's larger than any mountain in British Columbia. It's higher than any mountain in British Columbia. But it starts at a level of 7,000 feet. So Janice and I, when we were missionaries, were at a level of about 5,000 feet where we're doing all our work. So this was, to get to the bottom of it, you're at 7,000 feet. So it sounds like a lot at 14,300 feet. It sounds like a lot, but it was probably the easiest. It's a long climb, goes through meadows, and by the time you get to the top, you're not even at snow level because you're so close to the equator. And it wasn't a hard climb at all, but it was a very interesting climb. And I think part of my memory of it is that it wasn't an arduous climb, but it was an interesting climb for a number of reasons. So one of the things about that climb was that it was a 2-hour drive away from where we lived. So we had a couple of trucks. We took a couple of trucks to this place. And this was the furthest away that many of those 12 had been from their village, 2-hour drive away. Furthest that many of them had ever been. They were quite excited to be that far from home, 2-hour drive, and to see this mountain that they'd heard about that they had never seen. 2-day climb. I told them to bring 2 things. I told each of them to bring enough food for 2 days, and to bring something so that we'd be staying overnight on the top of the mountain, and to bring something that was warm enough, a sleeping bag or whatever. So my first big surprise was getting there, and I should have checked. Some of them came with no food, and no blankets, no sleeping bag. Now that might surprise you and I, in our own first world kind of thinking, but to go 2 days without food was not a big deal for them. They were more used to eating sometimes a whole lot of food, and other times not so much. So they were quite prepared to spend 2 days climbing the mountain, maybe eating some berries or something along the way. And then, I don't know if they didn't have blankets that they felt that they wouldn't need, but they were quite used to sleeping outside as well. So we began our climb, and it went very well through a lot of meadow, and it was a beautiful climb. It was a long climb, but it was a very beautiful climb. Some of them wearing only sandals. Got a little bit cooler as we got to the top of the mountain. And this is the third thing. There were a few of the young men that started spying my sleeping bag. Having never seen a sleeping bag before, or perhaps never seeing anybody using a sleeping bag. So when we got to the site, one of the first things that I did was I unraveled my sleeping bag. And there were a number of them that had a look at that sleeping bag and thought that it was probably large enough for at least 2 people. There was one young man that was particularly insistent that maybe that sleeping bag could be shared that night. I made it very clear that was not going to be the case. Now it's interesting, I'll have to tell you first that there was no homosexuality in that country that we ever witnessed. Probably was, but we never witnessed any of it. The men would hold hands with the men, the ladies would hold hands with the ladies. But I never saw any evidence that there was any outward homosexuality. So it was not for those reasons that they wanted to sleep in the same sleeping bag than I ruled that out right away. But there was one young man that was particularly insistent. I was a little bit more insistent that he did not sleep in the sleeping bag with me than he was that he should. Anyway, the next day we got up early in the morning. We climbed to the top of the mountain and did so without incident. I was surprised with how quickly we came down and got down off that mountain and back to our vehicles. And it was an experience that was obviously an experience that is near and dear to my heart as I recall it those 30 years ago. We often refer to experiences, profound experiences, memories, ones we have memories of a long time later, as mountaintop experiences. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the mountain. It could be by the side of a lake. It doesn't really have to necessarily do. But they're moments, they're God moments. In fact, somebody sent me an email recently saying that she was singing one of the songs that she hadn't sung before and how beautiful it was and profound it was, and she had had a God moment. So these God moments come to us from time to time. Some of them much more profound. Perhaps you'll have a God moment even here in church today. It is possible. So Jesus brings Peter, James, and John up to the top of the mountain. And there Jesus is transformed. And Moses and Elijah appear with him. Now Moses was the great lawgiver of the Old Testament. The one that led in the Exodus. The one who went up to the top of the mountain, came back down with the 10 Commandments. And Elijah was the greatest prophet in the Old Testament in terms of having some kind of unique, direct relationship with God. The one who wound up being the one that said that God was the still small voice. We often talk about God being the still small voice. That was Elijah, and of course, leaving his protege Elijah at the end as an old man, and Elijah seeing him getting into a chariot driven by horses of fire. Great story from the second chapter of Kings, 2 Kings chapter 2. But Peter builds the three of them shelters, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and one, of course, for Jesus. I don't know what they were going to use that night. But Peter is saying, let's stay here on this mountaintop. This is an exciting experience for us. This is good. It doesn't get better than this. They had arrived, or Peter is implying that he has arrived along with the others. And Peter's problem a little bit is the same problem as we have, isn't it? We get comfortable in the situation. Our needs are being met. And we just want to stay, but God says, no, we're not going to allow you to stay. We've got work for you to do. You need to get out of your comfort zone. And so he calls us, and he calls us often to do more than just stay in our comfort zone. Sometimes you and I are comfortable even when things are not all that great. Sometimes our attitudes are improper attitudes. And they're attitudes that we need to change, but we defer from changing and maybe even refuse to change. Maybe even enjoying that which is different, which separates us from God. We're a little bit like Lucy in Peanuts. Lucy and Linus are in discussion together. Lucy says to Linus, she says, "Boy, do I feel crappy today." And Linus tries to make her feel better. He fixes her up a sandwich. And as he gives her the sandwich, he says, "Is there anything else that I can do for you? Is there anything else that I haven't thought of?" And Lucy replies, "Yes, there's one thing that you haven't thought of. I don't want to feel better," she says. I can imagine maybe Lucy saying that. Maybe we can respond to that in a similar fashion. Some other area of our life needs to be changed, but we like it just the way that it is. We know that there's an adjustment that's needed. Maybe there's a resentment that you hold in your life, and you know that you need to let it go. Maybe your spouse needs to know more of your kindness, of your loving compassion towards them. Whatever your need is in transforming your life, the time to do it is now. So Peter builds these 3 tents and decides that it's good for him to stay there. And as he's doing that, a cloud encircles them. And a voice comes from the cloud, it appears from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I love, and in whom I'm pleased. Listen to him." Listen to the words of Jesus. And I don't think that we could do better than listen to Jesus' teaching, to listen to his parables, to listen to his wisdom, to listen to advice. But the disciples are terrified, of course, as you and I would be again. They fall down on their face. Jesus touches them. He reaches down and touches them and says, "Arise. Don't be afraid." It's amazing the number of times in Scripture that we hear this, "Don't be afraid." In the New Testament, we hear it right from the very beginning, the disciples telling Mary not to be afraid, telling Joseph not to be afraid, telling the shepherds not to be afraid, telling the disciples from time to time not to be afraid, especially in the upper room after Jesus has been crucified. Do not be afraid. God knows that fear consumes us, and it becomes an obstacle to our abundant living. And so often we hear this, "Do not be afraid." And we're afraid of very earthly things. We're afraid of failure in our lives. We're afraid of not measuring up to other people's expectations of us. We're afraid of failing in our security, to secure ourselves and to make ourselves safe and that of our family. Fear of lack of respect, or fear of lack of finances. And the message that God continually gives us is, fear not. But lots of our bad attitudes happen as a result of the fear that we aren't able to let go of. There's a true story of a young girl, 7-year-old girl. She goes off to Disneyland, and she's there for the first time, and she does the Space Mountain ride, and she loves it so much that she does it twice. And the next year she goes back there with her mom and dad, and she reads the signs. There's several signs about warning about how fast this ride goes and to be careful on this ride and how very, very fast it is. And she turns to her father at 8 years old now and says, "Daddy, I don't want to go on this ride." And the father turns to her and says, "Well, why don't you want to go on this ride? You loved it so much last year." And she says, "Yeah, but last year I couldn't read." Our fear sometimes gets us into situations where we shouldn't be. Our fear can bring us to healthy places. Fear of being close to the edge of a mountain is a good thing. Fear of a wild animal approaching us is a good thing. Fear of speeding down a hill too fast on a snowboard is a good thing. Usually fear is an unhealthy thing. It's an unbalanced thing, and it robs us of the joy of living. Many that have expressed a fear of a terrorist attack, and you're more likely to be hit by lightning, as you probably know, than by a terrorist attack. Those kinds of things haunt us, and we fear. We fear what others are thinking of us. We fear of aging. We fear of dying. We fear death. We fear of others who are different from we are. And a bad attitude can sometimes just be a simple way of coping with our fears. And so we need to take Jesus' words seriously. We need to hear Jesus' words, and we need to take Jesus' words seriously. Don't be afraid. We can take all of our relationships, our fears and our bad relationships, our bad attitudes, and we can turn them over to a God who listens to us. So listen to God's voice, who tells us to listen to his Son's voice, to listen to Jesus. And sometimes in the quiet of our heart, we can hear Christ speaking to us, the same way as that twin could understand that twin is inside a mother. Sometimes we understand that we are in God's womb, and we hear God speaking to us. And we hear new ways of living and new attitudes about life and about living. And so Jesus today would say to each one of us, don't be afraid. Listen to my voice. And today might be a new beginning in your life. Amen. Let's pray. Gracious God, it's so easy to be consumed by the concerns and the fears of the world. And yet continually you come to us and say, be not afraid. I'll never leave you. I'm with you always, even until the ends of the earth. So allow us to have a sense that we are in that which is life, that womb that surrounds us, that sometimes we can't understand or can't see or can't really kind of describe the same way that two twins talking to each other, if that would be possible, couldn't understand a mother that loved them and was concerned about them. They were growing inside, experiencing mother in different ways that they couldn't comprehend. We experience life and we experience living in ways that we can't understand, because we can't fully understand who you are and the power that you have in this world. And so help us get attuned to that and not be afraid to enter into that kind of realm of a presence, a holy divine presence with you. For these are the things that Jesus taught his disciples on the mountaintop. These are the things that Jesus talked about to the rest of his disciples. These are the things that God wanted us to hear when he said, listen to these words of my son. The words especially that he used when he prayed in this way, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever.